Good afternoon. Welcome to today's edition of the Coal Scene. I'm Chris Hamilton, and I'll be your host throughout the next half hour. Joining me in the studio today is Mr. Bill Rainey, President of the West Virginia Coal Association, who's going to give us a little update on the coal industry, talk about coal exports, perhaps review some of the actions of the recent legislature as it pertains to coal and energy, and then we'll see where else the show may take us. But thanks for joining us today. And Bill, good to see you. Thanks for stopping by.
Well, it's nice to be here, Chris. It's we got a lot of things we can talk about because things are pretty good in the industry. I mean, there's places that are challenged, of course, as you well know. So we can.
Yeah, it seems like just about everybody you see or talk to, they see a few more coal trucks going up and down the road. They hear a train maybe more frequently. They see more river and barge traffic, and all that bodes well. It's amazing how people see things like that and are able to tell that the industry is doing a little better.
It is, and that's and I think that's through deep West Virginia, and particularly southern West Virginia. But then you go north, and they're mining a lot of steam coal, and of course that was one of the subjects of the legislature that you and I and Jason dealt with of reducing the severance tax on steam coal, which is enormously important because it's down to the salvation part as to what we talk about, is we've got to save those jobs or do everything we can to save them. And a 2% reduction over 3 years in the severance tax would go a long, long way in that. And, there's several thousand coal miners that depend on the steam coal industry. So I think by, that ultimately being approved and put into effect would save those jobs and keep those coal miners working. And that's predominantly up north, although steam coal is produced in every one of the 26 counties we produce coal in. So it has a statewide relevance throughout the entire state. So, everyone. And the key to that was, and you were instrumental in that, is making sure that the county's share of the severance tax is protected. So, we wanted to be certain that happened, and it is. It's preserved, and even the additional 5% that goes to coal-producing counties is never going to drop below the 2018 level, which is really good for the counties.
Yeah, that may actually don't want to give anybody any false information, but that could. If there's a decrease in pricing or if production decreases, counties could actually receive a higher percentage of revenues based on the wording of that legislation.
They could, yeah. I mean, with the fluctuations that occur and all the variables that we have, such as price and volume and, where the point of origin is for these coals and where they're sourced from, absolutely it could be.
But at a minimum, their current shares preserved.
It is.
Going forward, and that's important.
It is. It's critical to the counties. They depend on that. And plus there was language put in that loosened some of the restrictions that they had on how they could use that severance tax money once they got it. And that was the general part of the severance tax money, of course. But that's what they wanted, because I think they're looking at things other than what was specified in the statute as to ways that they could benefit their individual counties.
We've had Mark Muco on this show today, or on this show previously, from the tax department. And, the whole purpose of having Mark on the show was just to talk about the enormous, economic impact that the industry has. But we spent a lot of time talking about severance tax and the distribution. I don't think a lot of people realize that money is distributed throughout all 55 counties. So, places far away like the Eastern Panhandle that, don't see the coal trucks or the river barges, nor do they have mining jobs, but they still receive coal severance dollars from the state treasurer.
Well, and that's very significant. And of course, that came out in the legislature. Everybody realized the ones that are elected to their delegate and senatorial offices, they understand how important the severance tax is, even to those counties that don't produce coal. So it was critical that all that be preserved to the extent that it was possible. And I think it's clearly 100% preserved, and as you say, it might be beneficial to some counties depending on the fluctuations.
Yeah, it really is. And I think when you talk to those county officials, you find out that the money spent on some infrastructure, it's spent on economic development, and I think they also shift a little bit of it over into the areas of need. And I know seniors, perhaps citizens, that borderline, on being less fortunate, we'll just use that term.
Yeah.
I think those individuals also rely on those severance dollars within the county boundaries.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And of course, the other one that was approved by the legislature was the rebate on investment to entice and encourage investment in our industry here in West Virginia as opposed to other coal-producing states. And it works as a rebate, and you can get a portion of the investment back over the course of years, depending upon. And everybody was worried about, is it going to impact revenues? And it's not at all, because it's brand new revenue that's generated as a result of what your investment was in machinery, equipment, improvement to the property. And then whatever your base year severance tax is, then over and above that is where you can apply for the rebate for that additional amount of severance tax that is being paid. So I think it's really good, because we need something that encourages the companies to invest here in West Virginia as opposed to Illinois and Pennsylvania and Ohio and Kentucky and even Maryland for that matter.
Following that legislation, I think you're correct that it should provide an incentive. That's the rationale behind it. I know when a lot of companies that mine here may not necessarily be have their headquarters here, their corporate offices. Right. We've known companies that's had major investment in West Virginia. They've had their corporate offices in Pittsburgh or Richmond, or out in the Midwest, right. St. Louis, whatever, because it's more central to their assets. They may very well be mining in Colorado and Wyoming, right, as well as here. So hopefully, as the West Virginia operations compete for those corporate dollars, that provides an incentive for a larger share, or at least some of those corporate dollars making its way back to West Virginia.
Yes, certainly that's the hope, and I think it goes well to that point, because it's 35% of the investment against 80% of what the additional severance tax was. So when you begin to do the math, then it can become significant. But what it also mandates is that your investment has got to create more volume of coal at hopefully a better price, so that you're paying additional severance taxes over and above what the base year is. And the rules have got to be done by the tax department, and as we go through the next year, and presuming and hopeful that bill will be signed into law, that we'll see some investment made here in West Virginia that'll be significant.
Seems like the legislature this past session in particular had a real focus on trying to do whatever they were able to do to help the industry, maintain its competitive edge, to try to grow its base, all of which I'm sure is intended to try to return the state of West Virginia where it was 7-8 years ago. It just seems like they did a number of things try to help the business and industry.
Well, they have, and I think thanks to you and thanks to Jason and others in the industry. But the study that was done by WVU that indicates that we're 13-14% of the overall GDP of the state. I think people have a greater recognition of that, and if you're in a coal-producing county, you particularly understand that. But then I think even in the non-coal-producing counties, such as Putnam, that has John Amos Power Plant, they recognize the significance of the coal industry, because that's the basic fuel by which everybody gets their electricity here in West Virginia. So I think all of that's expanding, and it certainly did seem to come to fruition with the leadership of the legislature and the committees, and they were all very interested. And the key is to keep as many coal miners working in West Virginia as we possibly can.
So here we are, you know, near the end of the first quarter 2019, and it seems like the industry's rebounding some. You know, I know it's a relatively small percentage, but it's a healthy percentage nonetheless. You know, I think we hit the low point towards the end of 2016, showed gains in 17 and 18, and it seems like we're maintaining those modest gains.
It is. You know, again, there's some disparity between how much coal was produced in 18. The state agency has indicated about 104 million tons, and the federal agencies, MSHA and EIA, say about 99 million. So there's 4 to 5 million ton disparity that usually works out over the course of the year, but that's, as you say, that's incrementally more than we produced in 17. And then 16 was the worst year we'd had in 40 years. So, you know, to go over and above 84 million, and we jumped 10 million in 17, and then it seems we jumped about 6 to 7, somewhere between 6 and 8 million in 18 as compared to 17.
And most of that growth, if not all of it, has been in the metallurgical
Most of
operations.
Well, it has been, yeah,
based on exports.
Because in 18 we had 3 categories that you keep track of: is domestic metallurgical, export metallurgical, and export steam, and then you've got domestic steam. Well, the 2 metallurgicals and the export steam market grew from 18 as compared to 17. Domestic steam coal decreased, and that's emblematic of what we were talking about in the legislature, and why that particular part of our industry is challenged is the ones trying to sell coal to the power plants here in America, because, as you've said many, many times, 4 years ago we were selling to 151 plants, and today there's only, I think, 50 plants. And I may have
telling.
I may have the numbers wrong, but I think the margin is pretty close.
And I just think that is so telling of where we are today and why our domestic market has shrunk the way it has.
Yeah, and I think it's so critical that we do everything we can to preserve that, because I'm telling you, it's so important to, particularly in northern West Virginia, where the majority of the steam coal is produced. But as we said, every county has some steam coal production, and you know, it's important to keep those folks working, and everybody that depends on that mine working every day. And we've got to take some steps, and the quickest one we could take was a reduction in severance tax. And over the course of 3 years, it proposes to reduce it by 2 years. But that makes a difference, export-wise as well as domestic. But it's really, really critical domestically here. But you're right, exports have grown, and thank goodness we've had them, because I tell you, we would have had a really difficult time had exports not picked up the last couple of years.
It's almost, I was looking at some statistics on exports, and you know, they've grown dramatically. It seems like they have followed the increase in production of steel that we have experienced here domestically, as well as and especially internationally.
Well, I think that's right. And you know, you look at Europe, you look at the Asian Rim, you look at India, and you look at the countries that are taking our coal, and they want the metallurgical coal. And thank goodness the Lord blessed us with some of the finest metallurgical coal in the world. And of course, we've always had the best coal miners in the world to dig that coal out of those thin seams in predominantly southern West Virginia, but there's also coal up in the Barber and Taylor County areas that can be used as metallurgical coal. So it's critical, though, that these plants want it, and the steel production is up, and we hope that continues, because we're as close to the port as any major coal-producing state, and that being Norfolk and Baltimore. So we can get the coal to wherever we need to, probably as efficiently and quickly as possible, if the railroads will all agree with us and work with us, which they typically are pretty good to do that.
Yeah, I read where you know, our little state here, because of, as you say, our proximity to our ports and expertise of our workforce, that West Virginia accounts for nearly 50% of all the U.S. exports
That
of
is
coal.
true, and that's been true over the course of years. And then when it all increases, then that means we have a great, 50% means more tons, because in order to maintain that 50% level, if you've got more tons being shipped out of America, then that means we're getting more tons that people are wanting, and that's good.
Our local business schools are probably, imparting with people the fact that we're beginning to play, on a global and international stage with the advent of the internet and computerization. We're able to expand, our marketing forces. But coal's always played in the export or international market.
It has.
As I understand.
And I think it's probably one of the major products that we export as a state. When you line up all the exports, I think coal probably is very near the top in terms of the dollars that we export. So it's, it's critical that the world, it's amazing that the world wants our coal, and then there's forces in America that are wanting to do away with the use of coal. I mean, it makes absolutely no sense.
No. So we basically mine two types of coal, or metallurgical coal that's used for, and by the way, that appears to be a safe supply of coal, in that you can't replace metallurgical coal in the steel making process with wind, natural gas, or other energy sources.
Well, they'll probably say you can, but I don't think anybody's ever figured out a way to do that.
No, I don't.
There's no way in the world.
Maybe that's out in the future somewhere, a replacement fuel, but
Yeah,
it seems safe. And then we also have steam coal, as you say, which seems to be the segment of the coal industry that's not really recovered from, that we saw with respect to the issuance of federal policy out of Washington.
Yeah, no,
5-6 years
we had
ago.
8 pretty tough years, as you know, and 16 was probably the most significant of those. And as we said, it's the least amount of coal we've mined as a state in 40 years. And the state budget suffered, employment suffered. And, we're still building back. We've got about 6,000 to 8,000 more employees at the end of 18 than we did at the end of 16. And we're still building. And I learned this morning that a number of companies are hiring red hats, which are the new apprentice miners. And that's really, really critical to the future of our industry. So hopefully the young folks are finding out that, it's a pretty good place to work, and they have an opportunity to make somewhere between $90,000 and $100,000 without even thinking about overtime. And I hope that continues among the younger generation.
You mentioned that there's been, 100 or so coal plants that have shuttered or been shuttered, where we used to send coal, and of course they in turn generated electricity. Nationally, that number is much greater,
Right.
than just 100. It seems like I read that's 300-400 plants.
It is. I think,
Nationally.
it's certainly units within plants, and, I think they use the number 600 units among 400 power plants. And that, and that's an ever-reducing market, which means that our ability to compete becomes ever more urgent. So the severance tax bill is critical, as I say, to keep the people working in the steam coal mines that we have. But it also is significant to the metallurgical coal, the investment opportunity that we talked about. And, we had some things, the Coal Jobs Act this year cleaned up some old archaic laws that had no relevance to what today's operations are. And, that helps us get on an even playing field with the other states too.
One of the provisions in the coal jobs bill deals with getting the State Office of Miners Health Safety and Training more involved with mine rescue and mine emergency operations.
Yeah.
And of course there's the other piece that strengthens the penalties for people that go into underground mines unauthorized, mines that are either closed or abandoned. But it seems like that's something that should have been done some time ago, getting the state office of miners health safety and training more involved with mine rescue. This, as I understand it, provides them a means to become superior at mine rescue operations.
Well, and, you know, they've been involved with it for a long time, and they're certainly very, very professional and experienced at it. So for us to be able to, our operations to be able to depend on them, I think is tremendous. Because we got some mines that are located in very rural areas that have some distance between where the mine rescue teams might be located and where the mine is. So this gives a lot more flexibility to that. And I think recognizes the abilities of the state to
Yeah,
for the great job
it does.
they do.
And they do have that expertise, and this just provides them with a mandate, if you will, or a means to you know, keep really sharp and have state-of-the-art equipment. I think there's some expanded budget opportunities for them to get the right equipment at these sites.
That's good. Yeah, I think all of that's very, very positive. And as you say, the penalties have been increased. It becomes a felony now for people to go into abandoned mines, which, for goodness sakes, they ought not be doing it, because what they do is they put the mine rescue teams in jeopardy of them having to go after these folks that go into these mines. And that's just simply not fair to those rescue teams for, you know, people going in there to steal whatever it is they think it's in there.
They think a lot of, you know, they think a lot of the motivation is, you know, people believe there's copper or electrical componentries or other items that you could salvage and perhaps resale. But the risk involved with going into an underground mine, I mean, it's just you know, beyond belief.
Yeah. Well, there's not much risk if it's an active mine because it's ventilated, it's
Right.
managed, it's roof bolted and everything. Lord, you take one that's been closed for 10 years, you don't have any idea what it is. And, you know, these folks are just not using their head at all to go in there because there's not much, at least what we think. Our experience is that we've never had much stuff left in there to begin with, or nothing that would be worth anything.
Exactly. You know, I hear that, you know, a lot of the individuals that are involved with this just think it's as simple as going into a cave, like an old limestone cave where you may have 20, 30 foot of height and fresh air breezing in and out, and that's not the case at all. So
No, it isn't. No, and the real problem is that they put people in danger and put them at risk that really have no business being put at risk to go to try to rescue them. So hopefully these new penalties and this new enforcement ability of the local authorities anyway, hopefully we won't have to deal with much of that anymore.
Well, that's yeah. Hopefully that comes to being part of the reality around older mines. The severance has been cut. I want to go back to that for just a moment because I understand that West Virginia had the highest severance tax of any state, you know, within our general geography, and even with the cut that was just made by the legislature, it's still the highest than most of the states that we compete directly for these regional markets.
It is, yeah. I mean, going from 5% of the selling price to 3% of the selling price. 5% clearly was the highest in the country. I think there was a percentage out west that was maybe higher, but that coal doesn't sell for near what our coal does. So the amount of money and the impact was not nearly as significant out there as it is back east here. But Pennsylvania has no severance tax. Illinois has no severance tax. You pay a dime a ton in Ohio. Kentucky had a similar but less severance tax. And I'm not sure about Maryland or Virginia, but I don't think it amounts to anything. So, you know, when we go out, people always told us that we always had a $4 disadvantage as compared to the very same coal that's mined in Pennsylvania and attempting to go to the same markets. So, yes, we were the highest. Today, this helps us. It probably doesn't get us to where we really, truly need to be, but I think it'll be significant. And the other key is, Chris, and you've said this many times, is the coal operator and the coal miner, they don't get the benefit of that. The utilities that make electricity are the ones that pay that tax. So now they have to pay a lesser tax, which means that West Virginia coal can be a lesser cost fuel, and maybe they'll be able to dispatch more of their electricity because it will be lower cost. They can dispatch more, thereby make more electricity and need more coal. And we hope it's West Virginia coal, so we have more West Virginia miners working.
That all remains to be seen, but that's clearly the objective here. And because of that tax being a pass-through and part of the fuel cost,
Right.
I don't know how it can't work that way.
No,
looking at it.
I think so. And as we've said, it's truly salvation, because we have about 4,000 to 5,000 coal miners that are working in the steam coal industry. We say we mine about 44 to 60 million tons of steam coal a year, and about a third of that is exported, and the other 2/3 is kept here in the country. And when you think about saving those jobs, that is so very, very critical, because some of the largest mines are the ones that are mining this steam coal. And there's UMWA mines, and it helps to the pension plan, it helps to the abandoned mine land fund, it helps all those things that are funded as a result of every ton that's mined. So it's critical to maintain as much of that production as possible.
It's amazing how big the impact is of the industry. It touches so many people, so many communities throughout our state. We talked about the coal severance tax being distributed back throughout all 55 counties.
Right.
I know I read a West Virginia University report that was showing the impact, the economic impact of the coal industry, and the fact that I believe it's still represented, even in its current smaller state, 1 out of every 6 or 7 dollars that flow through our economy.
That's right. I think that's exactly right. 12 to 13% of the GDP comes from our industry, and the downstream jobs are, people oftentimes don't think about them. I mean, we can talk about I think there's 36,000, something like that, when you count contractors, prep plant workers, direct, underground, and surface miners. At the end of 18, that's about the number we had. And those are the ones that depend on that, but they don't think about the others in the community that, because the coal miner's working, the man that sells conveyor belt, and the man that sells equipment, and the man that sells fuel, and the ladies that support all of that, they're making money. They're making a living, and then they've got to go to the grocery store, and they got to go to the pizza shop, and they service the community, and with the good wages that they all make, it reaches deep into the economy of West Virginia.
Well, Bill, I'm getting flagged here. We are just about out of time. Want to thank you for coming on the show today. Just a wealth of information as usual. Excellent update, and we'll get you back on soon. So thanks for coming, and thank you for tuning. Thank you for tuning into the Coal Scene today.